Good evening and good afternoon, dear friends, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I have the great honor and privilege to welcome you all to our traditional aviation talks of the Kapadokya University. As is known, during our program, we discuss the challenges and opportunities of the aviation-related topics such as aviation safety, security, capacity and efficiency, the threats to the global aviation, as well as the critical issues such as COVID-19 pandemic, returning to normal, vaccination, the recovery of aviation on national, regional, and global basis, and exchange the views about the future of aviation. Today, I have a very special guest and high-level executives from ICAO Montreal, Mr. Salvatore Shakitano, the president of the ICAO Council. And the permanent representative of Turkey to ICAO, Ambassador Suat Hayri Aka, is also with us today. Thank you very much, Mr. President and Mr. Ambassador, for joining us today. My intention is to run the program into two parts. In the first part, I will ask questions with Mr. Ambassador about the ICAO activities in general, and in the second part, industry leaders will have the floor to ask or comment about aviation, including the impact of the COVID-related issues. The format of our talks today will be a little bit different from the previous talks. High-level executives from the Turkish industry, Mr. Sani Şener, CEO of TAV Airports, and Mr. Mehmet Tevfik Nane, CEO of Pegasus Airlines, who have been invited to join our talks and to ask questions to Mr. President and/or exchanging their views. Although Mr. Bilal Ekşi, CEO of THY, Turkish Airlines, has confirmed his participation in this webinar today, but he is unfortunately unable to do so due to the last-minute unexpected personal issues. Distinguished guests, you are all most welcome. I would like to take this opportunity to inform you all that Director General of the Turkish Civil Aviation Authority has also been cordially invited to join this program, but he is unfortunately not able to participate in this webinar due to his other commitments. I am pleased to inform you that the academicians and the students of more than 80 aviation-related departments of the Turkish universities will also be able to join us today. Of course, the aviation professionals from Turkish and other aviation sectors may also join us and may ask questions. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the program if we have time, and I look forward to having these questions. Ladies and gentlemen, ICAO is an UN organization responsible for the global aviation with 193 member states. Turkey is one of the founding members of ICAO as a signatory party of the Chicago Convention signed in 1944. We have already talked about ICAO from different perspectives with the distinguished guests. We had a very fruitful discussion with Ambassador Eka on the ICAO-Turkey relations on 6th of April, and very beneficial talks with the president of the ICAO ANC, Mr. Nabil Naoumi, on the roles of ANC to the aviation safety on a global manner on 5th of May 2021. Today, we will continue to talk about ICAO and the aviation-related issues from all perspectives, especially at global level. Having said all these, I have invited my dear friend Salvatore Shakitano, the president of the ICAO Council. I first met him almost 30 years ago in 1992 during the JA Regulation Committee meeting, of which also I was the Turkish representative, while Mr. President was also chairman of the group committee, and so we have more or less 30 years of friendship, which I am very pleased with. Before I invite Mr. President, I would like to invite Mr. Ambassador Aka to have his opening address as the Turkish permanent representative to ICAO. Yes, Mr. Ambassador, please.
Well, thank you, Aydar Bey. I will keep it a little bit short as we have, so experts of the industry with us today. But I would like to start actually by thanking you, Aydar Bey, as a senior aviation expert and an old friend of mine for organizing such a high caliber event. Thank you. I also would like to appreciate the support of Kapadokya University for the support given to the aviation sector. But at the outset, I wish to greet all guests and friends who joined us today, especially Mr. Salvatore Shakitano, the president of ICAO Council, who is today's guest of honor. We know each other for years, actually. He was executive secretary of ICAC between, if I'm not wrong, 2010 to 2018. At that period, I was deputy undersecretary, lately became undersecretary of Ministry of Transport. So we have a long friendship. He then crowned his successful aviation career by being elected to the presidency of ICAO Council in 2020. And a nice coincidence, I have been assigned as permanent representative of Turkey to ICAO at the same days. So by all means, being the head of the most important decision-making organ of the ICAO, he is the right person to enlighten the audience on the ICAO activities and the recent aviation developments. I believe that all the participants, including myself, will have great chance to benefit from his experience and expertise in the aviation field, which has been facing most destructive crisis ever since they had. So I better actually stop here in the beginning and let the floor to experts share their opinions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for your time and dedication, as well as the valuable contributions to this program, Turkish civil aviation industry, and the Kapadokya University. Your support and cooperation are highly appreciated. And now I would like to return back to the President. Mr. Salvatore Shakitano is the 6th President of the ICAO Council. He succeeded Dr. Olumuyiwa Bernard Aliyu on 1st of January 2020. Mr. Shakitano graduated in telecommunications engineering from the University of Catania and began his career in aviation in 1980, joining the Italian Airworthiness Authority, RAI, where he had positions of increasing responsibility, serving as the organization's regulation director in 1992, then as technical director, and in 1996 as Director General. With the merger of the aviation branch of the Ministry of Transport and RAI, and the subsequent establishment of the Italian Civil Aviation Authority, ENAC, Mr. Shakitano assumed the position of Deputy Director General. In this position, he played an instrumental role in coordinating the core business divisions of the newly founded structure. He was also entrusted with multiple international mandates, chairing the Permanent Commission of Eurocontrol, representing Italy in the Management Board of European Aviation Safety Agency, holding the Vice Presidency of the Eurocontrol Provisional Council, and coordinating the Italian delegation during ICAO assemblies. As a result of his extensive experience in aviation international affairs, Mr. Shakitano was appointed Executive Secretary of European Civil Aviation Conference, ECAC, in 2010. In February 2019, he joined the Italian delegation on the Council of ICAO, where he served until assuming his duties as President of the Council. After having this professional background with the valuable contributions to the aviation industry during his life, I would like to invite Mr. President to have his opening address, and then I will have a few questions with the Turkish aviation executives about ICAO in general, as well as the impact of the COVID pandemic and the future of the aviation and recovery period. Yes, Mr. President, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Haidar. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the Cappadocia University for the invitation. Thank you very much also to Ambassador Aka for reminding that we were together. I remember in Madrid in 2009, I believe in the same panel, but we had already met before. As well, Haidar mentioned that we met first time 30 years ago. That's true, that's correct. And I still remember when 20 years ago, I called you when I was leaving the chairmanship of the JCO meeting asking, I wanted that you take my seat. And then I remember that you were surprised at that time. No, sorry, but for this, my opening and a very informal opening, because first of all, let me say that is a real pleasure for me today. I've not underlined that. I appreciate very much that we are having this talk while it's evening in your country. And wish to the participants, of course, have a good evening, while in Montreal is just afternoon, early afternoon. It's my pleasure because I like very much, I appreciate very much a relationship with universities. And why? Because universities are conceptually part of the mission of ICAO. The mission of ICAO is to promote the development of a safe, secure, and sustainable air transport, doing this in different ways. One of the ways is training. And in this sense, they have to have the opportunity to talk and to have contacts with students is a great opportunity. I'm sorry that I'm not able to speak in Turkish. That's a limitation, but to be frank, I already speak a few other languages, but I cannot go beyond English, French, and a little bit of Spanish, other than Italian. That's my time. So I'm sorry for this. In this sense, it's really important, this kind of talk. I have not prepared any speech, because that's my objective, is to have a very open, informal conversation with you. Just to mention 2 or 3 issues, and then I will leave it to you to manage the rest of the meeting. You said ICAO was established in 1944, and I am the president of the council. If you go around the UN agencies, it's hard to find an equivalent position. You find the Secretary General, as ICAO has as well, but you don't find a similar role of a president of a council that is a permanent council and is a resident council. Ambassador Aka, in this moment, is in his office, I believe 1 or 2 floors up, my upstairs, here in Montreal. And the question that to students could be raised is why ICAO is so special, having a council that is composed by 36 member states and is permanent, resident, staying in the same building where there is the Secretary General, where is the Secretariat, and there is a staff. Why we need diplomats in Montreal, resident, and not meeting when there is a need, as in other organizations, because other organizations have governing bodies that meet from the country, the capitals, and they meet when there is a need to take a decision. Why? The main difference is that the founders of the International Convention on Civil Aviation identified that there was a need to have a body ready to take actions and decisions when needed, adopting standards, reacting to emergency situations in a multilateral participation. And that's the point. It's a combination of rapidity in taking decisions or actions when needed, but multilateralism. That is the core element of the council and the composition that is by diplomats. Why multilateralism? Well, now we have to go a little bit back again, because in 1944, let's remind, we were in the Second World War, and we needed to have a strong participation of member states in taking decisions. And this kind of approach has been confirmed over the time. When you take decisions regarding the recovery of aviation after the pandemic or during the pandemic, you need a commitment of council members, of members or representatives of states in order to go in a certain direction. So the combination of needs to have fast and quick decisions from one side when needed, adoption of standards, adoption of recommendations, adoption of emergency measures from one side. And the multilateralism is the result that brings the characteristics of this organization as an international organization with the permanent and the resident council. For this reason, the president of the ICAO is the president of the council, not of ICAO. This one issue that is helpful to understand what is the background of this organization. Now, while I'm just giving some highlights and I mentioned the need of taking decisions, fast decisions, of course, we have to remind where we are now. We are in the middle of a pandemic. We are in the middle of the pandemic that started more than 1 year ago. At that time was March 2020, where we were still, the council was in session, meeting in the council chamber, and we were dealing with the normal business, let's say the work program. Now, that time, then there was a WHO that declared the pandemic status. And then we needed to start considering how to change our work and our meetings. And we suspended meetings in person, and we started having some meetings in virtual meetings that continue till now. But the main issue is that at that time, we have to decide to change the priority, not put aside what was planned to be done, because that had been done. We had in the agenda in our work program important decisions on climate change or CO2 reduction, emission reduction. Those decisions had to be taken, of course. As well, we had the certain number of amendments to annexes to the Chicago Convention, or the so-called SARPs, Standard and Recommended Practices. We had to take a decision at that time, of course. But the priority was when April 2020, the international fleet was almost grounded. We recorded in April 2020 that international flight was flying with only 2% of traffic compared with the same period of 2019. I mean, was minus 98% in April international traffic in April of 2020. That meant that we had to take actions in order, in a context where the pandemic was there, in order to support the restart and in the medium term of the recovery. And in this sense, we changed our agenda, and we decided to put on priority to work in a different way. Different way meant with the industry, because you know that the Council of ICAO has always been very formal in terms of protocol. So the industry are observers invited to present observations, but is the council working and deciding. Then we needed to work all together, because we needed to identify what were the decisions and the actions to be undertaken. And then we started issuing a certain number of recommendations that are partially in place, partially not. And this is a little bit disappointing, because there are some lack of coordination between states, but it's something that cannot be done beyond a certain level by ICAO. And now we are hoping that we will have the opportunity to see the light at the end of the tunnel during the current months, in view of the summer season. The summer season is already there, but in view of the summer months. So this is something that I wanted to anticipate regarding the and to introduce. You didn't give me the slot of time frame, so I'm afraid, but I will give you just another piece of information, and then I will give back to you. I will come back to you. In 2020, we have lost, on average, globally, minus 60% of traffic, passenger traffic. We fell from 4.5 billion passengers in 2019 to 1.7 billion passengers in 2020, minus 60% of passenger traffic. If you consider only international flights, the result is even worse, minus 70%. What will happen in 2021? The current situation gives some slight improvements between minus 40, minus 50%, compare again with 2019. 2019 is our reference, of course. So minus 40, minus 50% at the end of 2021. Maybe then we have three possible scenarios, depending on how the evolution of the pandemic will evolve and how the economy will react. Because now we are entering in a situation where the pandemic has triggered an economic crisis. Normally, economic crisis has an impact on aviation. Now we have a pandemic, economic crisis, and we need to recover. When we'll start recovering? Okay, we are starting a recovery now. We will have, in the best scenario, a return to 2019 only at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023. Best scenario, same level of 2019, but the worst scenario gives a potential indication that we can go back to the same 2019 levels in 2027. 2027. This is a very pessimistic scenario, but it's a potentially scenario that we have to consider. And again, I want to stress, it's not just because of the pandemic. Probably at the end of the year, we will have the effect of vaccine, more or less worldwide, more or less. Some regions are advancing much better, some regions less. But let's remind that we have economic crisis, and the economic crisis always impacted aviation. Let's remind what happened in 2009, 8, 9, 10, when there was latest big economic crisis. So we don't know what will happen for aviation. We know that in normal times, aviation doubles the traffic every 15 years. For example, in 2035, the latest forecast before the pandemic, we had a forecast of about 8 billion passengers, 2020, 2035, more or less. Now it's difficult to anticipate what will be the traffic at that time. What is important is that aviation historically tends to come back to the initial levels. Is a matter of time. In this sense, and now because we are in the university, I want to pass also a very, very strong message. Aviation will continue to be a sector fundamental for economy of the states, will continue to be one of the pillars of economy of the world in terms of contribution also to GDP, and will offer opportunities for jobs. And this is something that will have to be considered very much for my students. They will have the perspective to work in aviation, because aviation is going to come. We can have different let's say, timelines in order to return to normal life, but that's the situation. But aviation will remain a pillar of the international economy. Just to remind that aviation contributes to GDP, worldwide GDP, with 4.1% of the total GDP. Well, 4.1% is something that is very generic. It's not possible to catch what is the meaning of this contribution to GDP. The meaning is that if you identify aviation as a country, aviation will be a country as big as France or Germany in terms of contribution to GDP. This is the relevance of aviation to the economy of the world. Some countries, including Turkey, course, rely a lot on tourism. So in this sense, aviation is a fundamental element of the economy of the country, but also the business. And in this sense, of course, aviation is still, not to mention on cargo. On cargo, aviation moves 35% of the value of cargo in the world. 35% in terms of volume, of value, sorry, not volume. Volume is only 1%, but in terms of value of cargo, it's 35% of the whole of the freight that are moved over the world. So I wanted to say this kind of, let's say, in a freestyle approach, just as an introduction, but I'm absolutely available to interact with the participants and with the students. And sorry for being too long.
No, thank you very much, Mr. President, for the opening address. I believe this is the opening, right? And thank you for your kind words. And as a starting question, in fact, I have a few questions in my mind, but you have already answered many of them. And so I need to reschedule the list of questions in my mind. So I would like to ask you about the Council, the roles and responsibilities. Partly you have already mentioned, but also why it is important for the global aviation. In fact, also you have mentioned about the economical contributions to the state economies. And also you have mentioned that 36 members are available in the Council, but how it works and what are the strategic objectives of ICAO? I believe this is an important question for the students.
Of course.
So very briefly, would you please explain this?
Of course. First of all, yes, I mentioned already the role of the Council, but let me underline what are the main activities of the organization that are, let's say, under the governance of the Council. There are 3 lines of activities. I said before, the mission is to support the development of a safe, secure, and sustainable transport, air transport. The activities are in 3 directions. One is standard setting, to set the minimum common standards for member states. Then the member states can adopt, let's say, a higher level of standards. For example, for those that are more familiar, in the United States, there are the FARs. In Europe, there are the EASA rules. So there are different, but the minimum are those that have been established by ICAO. So the first line of activity is the standard setting. The second line of activity is monitoring the implementation of a standard setting. We call audit, but it's not an audit in order to identify if there are weaknesses, to identify responsibilities, or to punish member states that are not able to implement. The objective is if there are weaknesses, and then we go to the third line of activities, to assist member states to be able to implement the activities, the standards and the recommended practices. These are the main activities that are under the responsibility of the organization in general terms, implemented by the Secretariat, but under the governance by the Council. How the Council works is as any international organization. The Council is composed by 36 member states. Of course, all 193 member states can participate. Only 36 vote, but the others can sit and can also speak. The Council votes or works in terms of with committees, groups that elaborate on the basis of the work done by panels, representatives of states that prepare the work. So the work is based by experts. It's not a political job. UN, as you mentioned, the ICAO is a technical agency, is a specialized agency. It's true that the governing body is composed by diplomats, it is a political body, but a political in a wider sense, because it must combine the multilateral perspective of the member states. But the work is technical, and for this reason, the work is done by experts coming from member states that are contributing with their own expertise to the work, to the job of this organization. So these are the ways how we organize and we manage the activities of the objectives of the organization. You said, what are the objectives? What are the objectives? It's true that ICAO has 5 strategic objectives. In very simple words, to enhance safety, to enhance security, to support a sustainable development of transport, to implement facilitation, and to implement a harmonized economic regulatory framework. These are very generic objectives. Then in practical terms, we have some plans with targets. And those are the plans for the implementation of safety and security, for example, objectives. For safety, there is what is called GASP, Global Safety Program, with the targets at the global level and the regional level. Targets are, now I don't want to enter too much in detail, otherwise it will become complicated. But it's a measurement of how member states are able to implement the standards. So there are some targets and key indicators that allows to identify if some regions or some member states are below on the level or above the level of expectation. The other sector is security, and the plan is the GASEP, Global Aviation Security Program, that has other objectives in terms of targets and the measures. These targets are implemented by the states. Again, ICAO is composed by states, it's not composed by somebody else. There are representatives of states, but it's composed by states. So the states that first they decide what are the targets, and then globally, of course, and then they have to implement the targets at the national level. Then is the task of ICAO to monitor if they are implementing, as I said before, and if they are not able to implement it effectively, there is the task of the ICAO that is to assist them to implement effectively the standards, the recommended practices.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe you have also mentioned about the COVID-related issues, and I have a few questions about that, so I would like to move to that part. Ladies and gentlemen, nowadays aviation industry has been facing very difficult period due to the pandemic COVID-19, and impact of the COVID-19 is really devastating, and the need to ensure speedy recovery by removing the barriers to travel. Battling the COVID-19 crisis is the world's top priority, as many of the speakers mentioned. In the past, that all the stakeholders, including governments, airlines, and many others, are committed to join to this fight with different ways, such as delivering vaccines under the strict time and temperature standards, as well as implementation of the recommendations from the International Civil Aviation Organization and the World Health Organization throughout the travel process to keep passengers and crew safe. And at this particularly critical junction, with vaccines rolling out and new virus variants emerging, many governments are imposing further restrictions that prevent travel, and linking the world by air at pre-COVID-19 levels appears anything but imminent. Reconnecting is not only for airlines, but also about the tens of millions of people whose jobs have been lost or are at risk from the pandemic. Additionally, it's about addressing the immeasurable social and mental toll caused by loss of income, lockdowns, and family separations, It's about the global connectivity being crippled by the most devastating pandemic in living memory. I believe that the working together with the air transport sector, the governments and health experts are critically essential and utmost important in order to get the world flying again. The difficulty is still unfortunately continuing, at least for a few more months. Is there really a light at the end of the tunnel, as mentioned by many authorities? Having said all these, now I would like to ask the question about the impact of the COVID-19 to the global aviation and ICAO's role on that respect. Before returning back to the executives of the Turkish industry, who are also kind enough to accept my invitations, I would like to ask what the roles of the Council for COVID-19 related actions are taken by ICAO for returning to normal or recovery of aviation. Would you please, Mr. President, mention briefly what the recommendations of the Council's Aviation Recovery Task Force are? Briefly, please, Mr. President.
Yeah, absolutely, yes, because you have to consider, briefly, yes, because you have to consider that
I know that you have a program after this, therefore I don't want to take your time. That's my intention.
No.
I have enough time.
I unfortunately, yes, I have another meeting already started actually, but I will join when we finish. No, but briefly also because if I tell you that when the pandemic was declared, the council established a task force, normal way to work. The task force was composed by council representatives, industry representatives, international organizations or representatives. And when I say international representative, international organizations, I mean WHO first, WTO, the World Tourism Organization, and several others, plus regional organizations in aviation, as ICAC, LACAC, and so on. And the objective was to develop recommendations to restart and recover. We have adopted since then a set of 20 recommendations, a document called the Takeoff Document is a document developed with the cooperation with the industry that is implemented. I'm sure that the Pegasus is implementing. I'm sure that the airports are implementing. Those procedures are stemming from this document. That is a document adopted by ICAO that includes disinfection, includes the circulation of air, that includes a certain number of protocols and so on. Third document, the manual on risk assessment. I will not mention the detail, but what is the objective? The objective has been first to create what is called a public health corridor. I mean, a corridor, a connection between two countries that are able to establish on the basis of the risk analysis of the epidemiologic situation of both parties, of measures implemented, and with implementation of similar or standardized measures, to allow passengers to travel from a country A to a country B without taking the infection during the flight and without returning to member state or to go to the other country, bringing the infection. This has been the challenge, and to be frank, if I would say that I'm not really happy on the level of implementation of this approach, because several times aviation has been interpreted more as a risk of transmission of infection rather than an opportunity to recover the economy of the countries. But these are the main elements, documents, and the decisions that have been taken. Now, last issue that you mentioned on the vaccination. As I mentioned before, we are working with the WHO. And the objective is to have, you know that there are already some states or regions, as the European Union, as the United States, that are adopting the certificate of vaccination. Good. The point is that these documents must communicate each other in the sense that a document that is issued in Turkey, if there will be a document issued in Turkey, will have to be accepted in Canada, so that Ambassador Aka will be flying between Montreal and Istanbul and return back without quarantine, with a certificate that will have to be acknowledged. For the time being, we are not there. For the time being, we are not there for two reasons. One is because WHO has not decided to acknowledge the certificate of vaccination for technical reasons. They are not fully convinced from the scientific point of view that the vaccine prevents the transmission. What has been demonstrated is that vaccinated people are not infected, but has not been demonstrated till now, according to WHO, that a person that has been vaccinated is not able to transmit the infection. Anyway, we are very close. I believe that the evidence in member states are close to show that this is the case. So then the WHO will have to acknowledge the possibility to issue a vaccination, a certificate of vaccination. And the second issue is the technical interoperability, because we need to use the same technical instrument in order to show that a vaccine, a certificate of vaccine that will be issued, presumably, for Ambassador Aka in Canada, will be acknowledged recognized in Turkey. To do so, again, this is a job done by ICAO. We are going to adopt a standard. It's a technical standard, but it's the same material that we have for the recognition of the electronic passport. The e-passport is based on standards, but the e-passport is, you can read the passport in wherever country because it's based on standards. So what we have already done is to develop, and is going to be issued, a standard for reading of this certificate or vaccination certificate that will have to be interoperable, so that the standards that will be adopted by member states will make it compatible. These are issues that, of course, are not relevant for the news, are not relevant. But now that we are working in this direction, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. That's a better part.
Thank you very much. Now, I would like to return back to the industry representatives, and they may have some questions to you or make some comments about the aviation-related issues. First, I would like to return back to Mr. Şener to take the floor. Yes, Mr. Şener, what would be your comments on this?
Thank you very much, Haydar Bey. First of all, I would like to thank to Kapadokya University, our big boss, Mr. Salvatore Shakitano. I mean, he participated to this meeting, and Mr. Ambassador Sayın Aka, and to all our students. This is a very important webinar. Thank you very much for me for inviting. I would like to say very clearly that as airport managers, airport operators, we were really had hard days, but I believe it, Mr. Salvatore, that the light is end of the tunnel. It has been seen, and it's not the light of the coming train, it is the light of hope. So I'm sure that we will all see the good days, good old days. Now, aviation is very well experienced in global actions, regulations and rules. So we as airport managers have a lot of standards. I mean, in safety, security, in customs, immigration, in aeronautical and non-aeronautical activities, we have libraries of standards. As Salvatore, implementation of these are very, very important. So we all know the importance of the standardization in aviation. Now, health screening And rules are the new security. And just like enhanced security measures and equipments, we believe that health screening will become a major feature in the design, construction, and operation of airports. So these standards will continue to be implemented. And all the players of aviation sector must do their best to restore confidence in air travel. And all kinds of technologies, biometrics, electromagnetics, technologies, all kinds of technologies should be used. Practical application of all digitalization issues has to be used in airports to help these health screening rules to be implemented. As Salvatore mentioned, acceleration of the vaccines is very, very important. What has IATA, ACI, or ICAO has done? I mean, really, as I said, with the experience of ICAO, the connectivity between IATA and ACI, you all know that IATA is representing mainly airlines and ACI representing airports. So all these groups together with IATA is really did a lot, and ICAO's takeoff guidance is a very important guidance, global standard framework. I mean, they put a Council Aviation Task Force. This is a great study. I went through it, and they have airport guidelines, they have airline guidelines, crew guidelines, cargo guidelines. They are all collaborated with IATA and ACI. So we like this. So the standardization is there. I mean, we get used to it. But, you know, training of our staff is very, very important. We have to train all the staff with this new business model, because it is a new security health screening. We will use it for the coming many years. And all in all, these are affecting to implement a standardized approach. This is for sure. However, every country has its own dynamics. It is easy. We can implement these standards, but since every country has its own dynamics, I mean, some countries has economical crisis. They have economical problems, and health facilities are rare. The health facility capacity is not enough, is not sufficient. Vaccination ratios is not high. A number of cases are high. So we have to understand that mainly health ministries and science committees are in the driving seat for travel restrictions. I mean, we are doing our best together with ICAO, with the standards of ICAO, with the communication of ICAO, ACI, and IATA. We are great on this, and we will training our staff to obey these standards and to implement these standards. However, when you come to the travel restrictions, the countries' health ministries are on the driving seat. So they decide, and travel restrictions are very, very important for Turkey. I mean, you know, we are operating as TAV together with Fraport Antalya Airport, and in Antalya Airport, the main driver force of the passengers are Russian tourists. Now, what we have seen, Ministry of Health of Russia suddenly said that they put a travel restriction to Turkey. So to this travel restriction avoided a lot of Russians to come to Turkey in the opening of tourism season. So this is an important issue. We are operating 15 airports all around the world, and in this is 8 countries. In 8 countries, 15 airports. Now, there are 8 countries, different dynamics. different rules. So, but we have airports and aviation standard rules, international rules, multilateral rules. So we do not have any problem in aviation side. But the dynamics of each and every country is pushing a restriction onto us. Now in Turkey, you know the situation now, the case numbers are coming down, which is a very good news. It went up to 60,000 per day in March. Now it is 11,000 per day, which is a good one, but we are expecting it to come below 5,000. These numbers are very important for the tourists and travelers to come. As Salvatore mentioned, we all need passengers. Passenger is our driver. In Turkey, some of our friends who has restaurants or shops or many other issues, they are closed. They are saying that they are really the worst hit industries. I'm telling them that, I mean, you do not have customer and your shops are closed, but we do not have customers, passengers, but our shops are open because we have to keep all airports open. So keeping airports open with a very, very few passenger number, then it comes to the commercialization of the airports. You all know that airports are not only infrastructure providers anymore. I mean, they are commercial businesses like airlines. Before, mainly government-owned airports, so it was not an issue, a commercial issue, because governments were funding. But now it is a commercial business, so you have to use commercial disciplines. When you look at this, we have a lot of economical problem as well. But safety and security and health of our customers and our employees are very, very important. So we are taking care of it firstly. Later, we look at the cost levels. We are trying to reduce our costs, and we are trying to use the pandemic as a force majeure to the clients to get what we need from the clients as a compensation. However, I may say that, as Salvatore mentioned, I really thank to ICAO, thank to our ambassador there, Mr. Aka, and I thank to IATA and ACI employees, organizations. They really did very well during this pandemic, paved the way to us. We took the suggestions from them, and with these suggestions we did this implementation, so we are ready for accommodating our passengers. We are ready to see our passengers in our airports. Before closing my session, I would like to ask a question to Mr. Salvatore. You know, you talked about vaccination, and you said that WHO, the World Health Organization, did not give their final decision about the vaccine passport, let's say, but this vaccine passport, in some rumors are saying that they will not accept Chinese or Russian vaccination in this vaccine passport. Actually, this comes to a discrimination. I mean, this means that in Turkey, we mostly used Chinese vaccine, and now Russian vaccine is coming. BioNTech is coming as well. But what will happen? I mean, BioNTech guys will have the priority to have a vaccine passport, and the other two vaccinated guys with the other two kind of vaccines will not have it. Is this a true? Is this a rumor, or did you hear something like this? Could you please tell us about this? We are really very, we will be very happy to hear your answer.
Thank you for, because it's an interesting question. Of course, no, in the sense that the discussions between ICAO and the WHO is related on to build up a mechanism that will support the exchange of information between states. And the exchange of information between states are the certificate, the vaccination, but not just the vaccination, because there are other fundamental elements of piece of information that are relevant. For example, a passenger that has been already infected by COVID-19, but now as a result, is immunized. And if this will be an element important for acknowledgement or recognition by member states, this is another piece of information that will be helpful. As well, another piece of information is the medical test before leaving. What we are discussing is to create a mechanism of containing information that whoever is putting the information in, those that will receive the information will know. Then it's up to them to accept or not. So in this sense, okay, it's not a matter of ICAO, of course, to say that, or I believe also probably even at the WHO, if the Sputnik is good or not good, or if Pfizer is good or not good. What we are doing now is to work in order to have a mechanism, an instrument, so that the information is there. The information is provided by databases that are controlled by states, because we have to consider that there are private information regarding privacy and so on. And those information will have to be acceptable or not acceptable by member states. So at the end, it will remain absolutely a bilateral decision to accept or not. But what is important is that we start having an instrument. For the time being, we don't have an instrument. For the time being, Ambassador Haka can confirm, as he had already the first dose as I had here in Montreal, had a piece of paper saying that I received vaccination on the certain date on the end sign. It's a piece of paper that is no validity to be acknowledged. So what is relevant is to establish a mechanism, and then it will be member states that will have to accept or not. I do believe that in this sense, the international agencies, health agencies, will have an important role in sense of, but this will be done by them, of course.
Thank you very much. Very clear. Haydar Bey, the other issue when we look at these standards, as I told you that, I mean, the takeoff guidelines are perfect. Salvatore, really, I mean, it's really helped us a lot. On the other hand, the PCR test cost is very important. What we are seeing in the site, in the airport areas. In Turkey, for instance, it's €25. But in Europe, they are talking about 150 euros or something like that. So there must be a standard with the PCR test cost. But again, it's not ICAO's or ACI's or IATA's problem. I mean, it's the problem of health organizations. So we have to be. This is what I see: the consistency, collaboration, and connectivity between all of these entities is the vital importance. Absolutely. With this connectivity, I am sure that we will achieve the best. Haydar Bey, I would like to thank to Salvatore and Mr. Aka. But you know, I planned my program like 1 hour at 10 o'clock now. So I have another thing to do. I'd like to thank to everyone and say goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice evening.
Thank you very much.
Sani Bey, just one thing to compliment before you leave. About that standard, IATA adopted a new program, the Travel Pass.
Yes.
So Travel Pass in Turkey, we are the first aviation company which applied. It is going to speak with our HES code.
Oh, good. Perfect.
So once you had your vaccination in your HES code and the A-numbers, it is going to be automatically tied to IATA Travel Pass.
Perfect. Then it's done. Connectivity. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sani
you
Bey,
very
çok,
much.
thank you very much for your time and dedication, and we highly
Always.
appreciate it very much.
Always.
Have a nice
Thank you very
evening.
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Dear friends, thank you very much, Mr. President, for your valuable answers. And I would like, we have already passed 1 hour, and also I would like to return back immediately to Mr. Nane as the industry leader. So please take the floor, Mr. Nane.
Thank you.
What will be your comments? Thank you.
I have two provocative issues. First of all, thank you, Mr. President, as the official title, and His Excellency, and Haydar Hocam, and dear guests. One of them is about, you mentioned the three main issues of the ICAO, or the responsibilities. Minimum standard setting, number one, and the third one is the assisting member states. But when we look at the application, the standards, for example, standards of filling the forms, all around the countries are different. So we are flying 42 countries and we have to carry tens of different documents. And this is changing in time. So this is huge bureaucracy and others. What we were expecting from the ICAO as the highest authority, and as being IATA board member, I also mentioned this in the IATA meetings. ICAO has to bring all the countries and set the minimum standards of the documentation. But this couldn't be able to be happen. And we know that there are certain countries, which is the third responsibility of the IATA, is assisting member states. You can do for the certain countries, which I'm not going to give the names, which couldn't be able to do this, but you have the power to do that. And we couldn't be able to see that contribution from the ICAO. And still, IATA is doing the travel pass, but every country is not in that standard level to have that digitalization and the transformation of the data into that item. So the bureaucracy is there, and still there's a chaotic environment in the aircraft when you're flying so many destinations. First one is that. The second one, when we look at the GDP of the world, if we, as an analogy, if we see it as a big cake, what happened? Since last year, and I believe this year going to be the case because I'm very closely following the ICAO documents, and your first 6-month expectation is over there, like your last year outcome. So you're not drawing a bright picture also for this year. So it means that the world GDP or the world cake will shrink more than 10% in 2 years, which is very important. If we want to keep the social justice among the countries and among the humanity, everybody has to shrink equally. If certain industries do not shrink, if certain countries do not shrink as equal to the others, it means that some of the countries or the industries are going to expand their cake. And this happened. Aviation industry shrank, but I can very frankly say that the finance industry didn't. Last year in Turkey, during April and May, we couldn't be able to fly a single aircraft. It was totally closed down, but we paid the dues. Although we begged to the financial industry, please postpone us by paying the interest rate for at least 2 months. They said no. And there's such a contract. We have 93 aircraft. If you fail to pay one of the dues, 1 month, it triggers all the other contracts, even if it is not the same bank. So what happens? This will bring the social injustice. So what I'm going to comment and ask your views as the highest authority of the aviation and a pioneer industry in the globe, and which is most wounded also at the same time, we need a new Bretton Woods to create the social justice. And as a part of the United Nations, this can be done at your level. So what do you think about this? And while our ambassador is here, we need his personal contribution if he believes in such an event. Else, it is going to be really hectic in the future for the world justice. So
As he promised. This is a difficult question, Mr. President.
Oh, it's a difficult question, and I can complement adding some other elements. I will mention one, by the way. But first of all, let me say, it's a matter of fact that the pandemic has created as enhanced disparity, differences between companies or sectors or domains, but also between individuals. Just to consider that those that have been working on private sector, restoration, tourism, has been impacted differently from those that have been working for governments. Notwithstanding the measures that have been adopted by member states, there have been people that have been less affected than others. Unfortunately, in the economic sectors, let's say, the consequences for aviation have been more negative than for other sectors, for one specific reason. Because aviation has been considered, it's not only one piece of the economy of the world, it's been considered one of the pieces contributing to the transfer of the infection. One of the elements, for me, has been quite often disheartening, listening politicians stating that we must prevent people to travel. That's something that is difficult to accept. The problem is not to prevent people to travel. The problem is to have proper measures so that if people will travel, will not get infected, they will not transfer the infection. And in this sense, what we have done as ICAO has been to work in this direction. But I'm perfectly aware that this has not been the perception. For this, the effect, the perception. For this reason, aviation has paid twice the price. This is a matter of fact. You mentioned that the cake has been shrunk, and somebody has taken a. Well, it's a matter of fact, and it's not. I believe that I can mention one company and a comparison. It's a data that has been provided to me informally by IATA, so it's not an official data. But if you combine the economic value of all airlines now, I mean those that are in the stock exchange, those that are not in the stock exchange, they are more or less 1/2 of Amazon. This is a simple, let's say, comparison between two sectors, one that has been paying a bill more than another one that has been not benefited because they've done their job, of course they've done, but of course there's been a huge difference. What could be done by ICAO? Well, to be frank, normally by nature I'm an optimist, but in this sense I must be very cautious. What we have tried is to convince member states that traveling was possible without penalization, without measures that sometimes had more the intention to convince people that there were, let's say, there was control of the situation rather than really benefiting but this has not been easy. And to be frank, it's very, very, very, very hard that ICAO could do something more. It's out of our. So the reality is this, and unfortunately, the differences are not just between aviation and other sectors, but they are there, and are the price. These are the prices that will have to be paid by the world, by humanity in this after pandemic. Regarding the first question, yes, you're right. I didn't mention the detail, but there is an implementation aspect that is not harmonized. And that there is an implementation aspect of standards. By the way, you mentioned those from the airlines. Airlines are subject to multiple audits. Of course, ICAO doesn't audit the airlines, audits the member states. And when I refer to the implementation referred by the member states, of course, one of the issues that we are working, we're discussing with the IATA, is to find a way to incorporate as much as possible the implementation programs of the industry in order to feed the work of ICAO, in the sense to focus the work of ICAO where the industry has already identified problems rather than in other sectors. But there is a lot to be done in this sense, and I acknowledge, I agree with you, there is still a lot to be done, but we are working in this direction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nane, for the questions and comments, and also thank you very much, Salvatore, for the clear and honest answers. In fact, we are 16 minutes behind the schedule, and therefore I have some other questions, in fact, from the audience and also on Mr. Ekşi's behalf. I was going to ask the question, but some of the answers also will be used as answer of his question. And therefore, having said all these, we come to the end. We have had a very fruitful and beneficial discussions with the President of the Council and the permanent representative to ICAO, as well as the high level of executives of the Turkish industry. I believe that this program has provided brief, clear and beneficial information about the Council activities, as well as the challenges and opportunities of the global aviation. We have restricted time, not allowing us to talk about all aspects of the aviation, unfortunately, but we will continue to talk about the aviation. And now, before closing the program, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Ambassador for his closing remark, then I will return back to Mr. President. Yes, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Haydar Bey. I will keep it as short as possible. As it was indicated by the speakers here, aviation is an economic enabler of and a catalyst functionality of many other sectors heavily depends on a reliable and efficient air transport system. So in this regard, Turkey appreciates the hard work achieved by ICAO Council Recovery Task Force, and we urge all the actors and states to implement its recommendations, because we need to safely restore air connectivity. We need to strengthen public confidence in air travel, as well as preventing any deterrent additional costs. This is of paramount importance. The most important thing is to be prepared for the COVID-19 pandemic, considering the rapid changes and the transformation the virus caused in this sector. I believe the evaluation and understanding of these changes will serve accurately position all aviation stakeholders to prepare and properly respond in the upcoming period. I am confident that ICAO will continue to play the vital role to lead the sector to adapt to a new ecosystem. So to conclude, I would like to extend my thanks and gratitude to Mr. Shakitano, as well as other guests, for Mr. Shakitano for his close coordination and sincere relationships with our delegation to ICAO. I would like to thank you and the Kapadokya University for the organization of this fruitful, very useful event, and thank all the other contributors, Mr. Nane, Mr. Şener. Hope them nice summer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
It was a great summary for the talks today. And also, I would like to return back to Mr. President for your closing remarks, Mr. President.
Thank you, Haydar. Actually, it's just to thank you all for having organized this webinar. As I mentioned at the very beginning, I attach a lot of importance to the relationship with universities, to have the opportunity to have students that can participate in this discussion. So it's a great opportunity for them. I would say I would have liked to have the same opportunity when I was a student some decades ago. nowadays it's possible because we have this kind of tools and we have the knowledge that we became also more familiar with these tools thanks to, let's put it this way, I don't want to say thanks to pandemic, but as a consequence of a pandemic, let's put it this way. I'm sorry that we don't have enough time to have the opportunity to receive some questions from the students, but I hope that there will be another opportunity, and hope there will be also another opportunity to come and to see and to visit Turkey again in person. I've been, as Aydar knows very well, been many times in Turkey. Normally, unfortunately, just for business, not for traveling or for pleasure. I hope that we'll have the opportunity to continue to come as it was in the past. So thank you very much indeed.
You are most welcome.
Thank
Thank
you very much, Mr. President. You are most welcome. And I would like
Be
to
our guest, please, Salvatore.
Will be my pleasure.
always.
We have good mangiare.
I
Molto
know.
bene.
I know.
Hopefully, we look forward to seeing Mr. President after the pandemic in Turkey. So we look forward to seeing you.
Thank you.
Hopefully soon.
I hope so.
I would like to thank the President of the ICAO Council, Mr. Salvatore Shakitano, the Turkish and permanent representative to ICAO Ambassador Salvatore, as well as the CEOs of TAV Holding and Pegasus Airlines, Mr. Şener and Mr. Nane, respectively, for their time, dedications, and valuable contributions to this webinar. And I would also like to thank to the management of the Kapadokya University for their valuable support and giving me this opportunity, and the technical staff having contributions to organize this program. Their contributions are highly appreciated. Big thanks to the audience and observers. As far as I have been told, there are enough and many number of significant number of participants, individuals currently being with us today. And also, I am so sorry not for taking some of the questions from the audience due to the time restrictions, but hopefully in the forthcoming aviation talks meetings, we will accommodate their questions. Thank you all, and I look forward to being together with you during another event, and have a nice afternoon to Montreal and evening to Turkey. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Nice
Bye.
evening.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.
Good evening. Bye bye. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
İyi akşamlar.
İyi akşamlar.